Hi there, and welcome to the Y Factor podcast.
Wait, sorry, what are we talking about?
The Y Factor podcast. It's where young elected politicians, or YEPs, share how they're making real changes across Europe.
All right, I'm in. Let's hear what the future sounds like.
Welcome to YEPs on the Ground, the podcast that brings young voices to the hearts of Europe. Today, we're honored to be joined by Tugdual Le Lay, a former young elected politician representing the Party of European Socialists here at the European Committee of the Regions. He is from Guingamp, a small town in northwestern France. From what I know, Guingamp has a very nice football team. Am I right? Is this
Yeah.
the case? Amazing. All right. So before we dive into the conversation, we'd love to get to know you a little bit. So I would like to ask, what is your motto in life? Something that guides you inside and outside of politics?
The main idea is to be serving people. So I'm a president of a basketball club. I give classes as well, and it's both serving people and being able to convey messages and hope in what you do.
Amazing. That's very inspiring. And my second question would be, when did you first feel European?
Actually, I felt European very early. I started my political and professional career at the European Parliament, but even before in class, when you start learning history classes and when you start learning new language. My mom is a Spanish teacher, so yeah, very early you get to get interested into what the other is doing, what the other is, and what are the other values, and most importantly, maybe what kind of values we have in common. So this is how it all started, and this is how I've been involved in the European project, whether it is again professionally, politically, or in my involvement in associations and so on.
Totally, that's quite interesting. Thank you for sharing those insights. Moving on to our next section, I would like to know if you could tell us a little bit about your political role at the local level and how does it connect to your work here at the Committee of the Regions?
Yeah, I guess being elected locally is kind of important because you get to again convey messages and try to fight for what you think is very important. Guingamp is a small town, so 7,000 people, and we have a lot actually of challenges, whether it is health in rural areas, whether it is transport, whether it is you name it, employment. The idea that therefore is to try to create a bond between European level, national level, and local level, because sometimes it seems like it is complex. It seems like all that is being talked about in Brussels doesn't actually concern small towns like Guingamp and many others, but actually it's not the case. And so with my experience, I'm trying to create bonds and try to also create links with the regional level so that we can discuss topics and try to push forward our agenda. Again, whether it is housing, whether it is health, whether it is rural development, whether it is digital, fighting the digital divide, that's it.
Well, in regards to this, I feel like it could be interesting for you to also share, let's say, a project or an initiative that you've been involved in that has had indeed a meaningful impact in your local community.
Yeah, of course. As I said, I think one of the main issues that we're facing right now is access to health in a rural area like ours. And so we are confronted to some difficulties because maternity are closing. And I am convinced that at European level, there is a leverage. We've seen it, for example, during the financial crisis where we've been able to have Europe intervene. We've seen it during COVID when even though health is not a European competence per se, yet it was made possible for the European Union to intervene to help and make health better in all the member states. And I'm pretty sure that it should be the same for as far as maternity and access to health in general, because we're witnessing a real desertification of access to health, and especially in rural areas. So this is the fight that we are going through right now in my local town, and this is where I'm trying to bring Europe on board. If Europe is listening, of course, and if Europe wants to do something, which I'm sure they can. Now the question is how, and the question is when, and the question is with what priorities and what means. And this is the entire subject and the entire topic and the entire interest of having me involved, whether it is at local level and European level, and both at the same time.
Well, actually, with regards to this, while preparing for this episode, it quickly became clear how deeply committed you are to supporting, let's say, rural areas, especially when it comes to, as you said, preserving essential public services in such small towns, and also promoting, let's say, local job creation that truly stays local. But we also noticed your strong engagement in your hometown's political and social life, alongside, as you've mentioned, your broad experience across Europe, including the time spent here in Brussels. With all of this in mind, you seem to be actually the best fit for us to kind of help us understand how local realities connect to the broader European picture, per se, and why that connection matters. So, you've seen rural communities up close and also worked at the European level. I would like to know what's one thing you think Brussels really misunderstands regarding life in small towns?
I think it's a matter of perception. I think the European Union is really involved with trying to create bonds with cities in general and local communities. Now, the thing is, I've had the honor of working as General Secretary of the European Confederation of Small Towns, and the main difference I think is that sometimes the challenges that you face in a small town or in rural areas cannot just be seen as just another challenge like we face in Barcelona, Paris, Munich, Milan, you name it. And I would say that there's a majority of people actually living in rural areas within the European Union, and when the European Union tackles the challenges of cities and regions, it is usually a bit more rural, and than it is more rural for small towns than it is for big cities, and therefore sometimes the challenges are a bit different. There is an idea and a notion that is very important, which is equity, which is equal access to health, which is equal access to public services in general, because everybody deserves an equal access to public services. And I think this is often a misconception, which is, yeah, we talk to cities, yeah, fine. We talk to regions, yeah, fine. But sometimes challenges are a bit more compelling, and they're very different in rural areas because of distance, because of absence of structures. And this is exactly where we need more infrastructure, where we need more focus and more attention, and maybe even more help from European political institutions.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And actually, as a matter of fact, we also saw that there have been recent studies that show that the Euroscepticism sometimes tends to be stronger in rural areas compared to cities, and mostly because people there feel, let's say, some type of disconnect between the EU and their daily lives. With regards to this, what do you think is at the roof of that feeling? And do you believe it's truly possible to build a European Union where every citizen feels like they're right at the heart of the decision making?
Yeah, it's a very this is the fundamental question, to be honest, Barnia. The issue here, I think, is the fact that people feel abandoned. Let's just be very honest. Like, it's not even the question of whether why they don't go to vote. They don't go to vote because they feel abandoned. There is worse than abstention. We're always talking about fighting against abstention, but actually there is even worse. And unfortunately, this is the main problem. And that problem is what is the fact that you don't even listen to those who go vote. And unfortunately, when you are in situations where public services disappear, when you vote for different programs, or when you vote for different priorities and you don't see a difference, this is even worse than actual abstention, because here are people who are crying, who are screaming that they need help for public services, for infrastructures, for services in general, and yet they don't see anything coming. So the main feeling that arises from there is quite automatically a question of abandonment, a question of, okay, they don't care, okay, they don't see us, okay, they don't want to hear us, or they just don't know what to do. And if that's the point, then of course I understand Euroscepticism rising everywhere, because it might give the impression, and you might live under the impression, that Europe is not bringing anything positive. And if it is, you need to see it. And because it is, then there is a question of being able to see what Europe is doing. And sometimes, let's also be honest, Europe could do more. Europe could do more and be present differently and maybe more precisely with the subsidiarity and everything. But I'm not going to go through that now. But yeah, that's it. So I think it's a lesson for everyone. It's a lesson, I guess, from people from rural areas, saying that it is not exactly true to say that Europe is useless. It is not exactly true to say that it is not doing anything. Yet the European institutions also have to hear that, yeah, rural areas are screaming. And then it's up to whoever, it's up to who wants to just hear it and do something about it. And we have there a collective responsibility, which, by the way, explains also my involvement at the European level. We have a common responsibility to be able to give answers, to show that whatever you guys are saying, whatever you guys are screaming for, we are here, we are hearing, we are here, we are doing something. And even if we're not doing exactly what you wanted, we're doing something, and we're not letting you guys die in some rural, remote areas like nobody cares. And honestly, it's a question of feeling. It's a question of how you feel about it. And when you're convinced that this is happening, there's not many arguments that still stand after such a feeling.
Okay, makes totally sense. But actually speaking, what do you think are the steps that Europe can take to foster a stronger sense of connection and presence among Europeans living in rural areas of the Union?
Honestly, I think we need to get back to a couple of bases. The first one is hope. And this is not just philosophy or theories. The problem is that the European Union was created upon a promise that was never, ever war again on this continent. Well, unfortunately, it's still happening. And today, like it or not, the European Union is not selling any hope anymore. And so the main problem would be to be able to have a message, like have a real strong message. You know, like in the 50s, it was very simple: peace. Maybe today it's not, well, it might as well be peace again, which is very unfortunate, by the way, and terrible at the same time. But it's also about the future generation, and it's also about, like, what kind of future are you guys going to be living in? And if Europe needs to have a message, simple. Europe needs to have something to say, and for me, this is the main priority: is have something to say, bring hope. And then I would tell you, hope, I think, at least as far as I'm concerned, is about public services. We can see today that there is more and more poverty at European level everywhere, that there is precariousness everywhere, whether it is housing, whether it is employment, whether it is mobility with the challenges ahead as far as I don't know, green transition and the Green New Deal, whether it is for cars or whatever industry that you want to think about. It's a question of in what direction are we going. And by the way, we see that all the countries around Europe are facing the same challenges, and we see that all those challenges can actually only be addressed at European level if different countries put their strengths together, try to answer those challenges. Let's just talk about climate change. Let's talk about the war in Ukraine. Let's talk about whatever tariff trade with the United States and China and India and Brazil, and what kind of message, including as far as human rights is concerned, what are we telling the youth? What is the message of this European Union? What is she fighting for? And honestly, today, I think this is the main point. And for me, the message that would actually create more trust and confidence in European institutions is bringing hope, trying to show that with the European Union, we're going somewhere. Today, unfortunately, I see trade deals, international trade deals. I see a lot of things, but I'm not sure that talks to everybody. I'm not sure that this is something that everybody can relate in their daily life. And I think that this is unfortunately not something that people can relate as far as what their daily life challenges are.
Yeah, I agree. And hope is simple, indeed, yet powerful message, I would say, especially given the geopolitical climate that Europe is facing today. With this being said, finally, on a more personal note, I'd like to ask about your journey from growing up in a small town to becoming a professional active at local level and European levels. What are the biggest challenges that you've had to face when you first entered the political arena? Like, in your view, how have these challenges changed over time? And do you think they remain the same today, or have there been new obstacles that emerged in response to, of course, the evolving world that we live in today?
Yeah. Well, I think the main challenges is that even though everybody knows Guingamp for their football team and for a couple of famous players, Guingamp is a small town, and so even though I'm very proud to be from here, the question is when you're coming from a 7,000 inhabitant city, you are not as heard as you could be if you were elected in Paris or if you were elected in any other big cities in a big European city. So yeah, there a challenge, which is how do you make yourself heard when basically you are an elected official, like there are millions probably at European level coming from small towns. And at the same time, and especially I would say, especially after the COVID crisis, I would say, small towns became sexy. I would say that small towns came back on the forefront of the political scheme by more and more cities, more and more challenges were referred to as how is it going in small towns. If you remember correctly, during the COVID, it was mostly about how do mayors answer the questions or fears of their inhabitants. How do you actually fight the virus? How do you actually organize your municipal life? Because actually, it is happening in all those villages. And you can talk very theoretically and almost philosophically about small towns. At some point, it's happening in some neighborhood. It is happening somewhere. Like you can talk about the climate change, but we have to be building stuff in some neighborhood. And I am very convinced that the world's greatest ideals, they all start in some neighborhood at some point. And this is what I would say have changed, is that there's been more and more consideration for what is actually happening in small towns, because they are the heart of our democracy. They are the heart of how is our political landscape organized. Honestly, it's not my fault, but if you look in Europe in general, there are a lot of small towns, and even more so, this is a model. It's very different in Brazil, for example, where my wife is from, or in China, that I know a little bit as well, or India. Small towns over there are 3 million people. Here in Europe, when we talk about small towns, it's a few hundreds, a few thousands. And this is also a mark of how democracy is organized concretely on the ground. And therefore, when you hit specific periods of time like COVID crisis, when you have also financial crisis, economic crisis, it's also always interesting to understand how do those small towns organize themselves, and how can our value and democratic principles still stand in periods where there is more and more uncertainty. So to answer your question, yeah, it's never easy to be part of a small town, because you probably don't have the same visibility as you would have in another context. But at the same time, I would say that in the past few years, small towns came back on the forefront, and therefore I see more interest in what we might have to say now. And I hope actually that this will not vanish in the coming years, because that would be a mistake. But it is also our responsibility to make ourselves heard. And again, this is why I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. And this is hopefully can inspire the next future uh, young leader that could be here listening. And with regards to this, I think it only makes sense to leave something to our listeners. So, what advice would you give to young people that might be listening this episode from their small town somewhere in Europe that are maybe seeking to feel more connected to the EU?
I would say a couple of things. I would say first, it is all about standing up and having a message. Having a message, why? Because unfortunately, we see sometimes some political officers who don't have much to say, yet they're speaking a lot. And unfortunately, it might sound dumb and stupid and simple, but if I have a message, is have something to say. Literally, fight for something, try to make your place a better place, fight what you think is unjust, and also there is a in a way that you do politics. uh, Always have in mind that you will go further if you go through compromise. And compromise, this is something that you learn very well at European level. It probably doesn't go exactly as you were supposed to, or as you wanted to, or even as you thought was the best. But it's always better to be two than just to be right alone. And therefore, I would give you this advice, which is stand for what you think is important. Also, have something to say, literally, like have a message, and build compromises and try to fit and try to think where and how can you unite as many people as possible in order to just make your place a better place. And this is possible everywhere. And the European level is literally all about that, which is trying to find common grounds, common values, common challenges, and common answers to challenges that we're all facing all together. And whether you're in a small town, whether you're in a big town, whether you're single, whether you're married, whatever, whether you're Spanish, French, or German, there are some issues that we will have to answer all together, and it's all about that.
Well, thank you for sharing these valuable words. I'm pretty sure these will resonate with someone among our listeners, and I hope they do
Hopefully.
and shape the next, who knows, young elected politician that might be listening to us today. All right, Tugdual, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing again your valuable insights and experiences. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about Tugdual's work, you'll find more information in the episode's description. Stay tuned for more conversations with inspiring young Europeans, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram for updates. Make sure to catch our next episode to discover who will be joining us as the next host and guest.